Well, good morning, beautiful people. We're going to have fun this morning. I love the image of the lion. Who of you have ever seen a lion in a zoo, or so most of you? Who of you have encountered the lion in the wild? Okay, so what you have seen was just a shadow of what the lion really is. I remember when I was about, I must have been 5 or 6. It's before must have been 5. Before I went to school, we kind of lived next to the Kruger National Park, and one of my favorite pastimes is when my brothers went off to school, I was just let loose into the wild. And I would climb these rock formations, and on one of those occasions I pulled myself over a rock, and as I pulled myself over the top rock, I heard this roar that just chilled my blood, and I just froze on that rock. It felt like for hours, but it must have been minutes. And I saw a movement. Thankfully, this lion decided it's satisfied and moved on. But I remember that encounter with a live, real lion was very different from the encounter in the zoo. Because this creature could devour you. And we've spent thousands of years taming a God that can fit into our zoos, that we could visit on a weekly basis, wave at him beyond the rails, feed him, keep him at the distance. And what we have not realized is that the true God is the kind of God that does not fit into those structures. He's not tame. It's a God that does want to overwhelm us, wants to astound us, wants to devour in the most beautiful way everything you thought you knew about yourself. So, Papa, we just invite you this morning to come and encounter us, to come and reveal yourself. Come and overwhelm us. Thank you, Abba. And at the same time, this awesome, amazing, untamed God is also the most humble God. A God that continually withdraws to give us space to discover our own creative capacities that He's given us. A God who's not interested in imposing His design upon your life. He's not even interested in assigning the value and the meaning of your life events, but the God that continually makes space for you to decide what your life events mean. So if you haven't been here in our previous sessions, maybe go see those videos, but basically what we try to explore, and we're going to take it a little bit deeper this morning, is that grammar, the rules of language are necessary to make communication understandable and possible. But grammar itself doesn't tell any story. It is what makes meaning possible. And within the rules of grammar, I can tell any story, even stories that have never been told before. The rules doesn't restrict the meaning. I can give those stories. They make meaning possible. And maybe God is more like the the framework of language, more like grammar that makes meaning possible, rather than the one that wants to impose a narrative and impose meaning upon your life. So God is the one that Jesus introduces as the one for whom all things are possible. The one who stands in front of us and say, I invite you to author your own story. Now, as a good parent with intentions, he knows where he wants to take us. But he's not controlling the path that takes us there. He gives us the creative capacity to participate with him in telling that story. So I want to take that a little bit further this morning. We also looked at yesterday some of the ideas of time and eternity, and we explored some of Plato's idea. And I'll take another example. Imagine this is a bottle of wine. You've got a good imagination, I know you can do that. Now, and you might wonder, why do you go on about like philosophical ideas, etc.? Why don't you just get straight into the Bible? I will quote a few scriptures to make, if that makes you comfortable. just hold on. But most of our understanding of those scriptures are formed within categories of understanding that has been formed by the philosophies of our culture that we grow into, etc. So that's why it's good to deal with those things as well. Now, the Platonic idea of what gives substance or essence to anything, if this is a bottle of wine, is he imagined that there's a heavenly realm where there's the perfect bottle of wine. And every bottle of wine on the earth is kind of a copy of that bottle. And if you wanted to know what is the essence, the substance of this wine, Plato would say it derives it from this heavenly realm. That is its essence. Why is that relevant? Because in theological terms, we've interpreted that to mean that somewhere in me there's a spirit, an essence, a substance. And it was designed by God, and the perfect copy of that spirit is in the heavenly realm, and he deposited in me something called the true Andre. And my job is to just find it and be it. Does that sound familiar? Have you had similar ideas within your faith upbringing? Now that's quite fundamental to how you understand what and who you are. Wouldn't you agree? Now, the philosophical categories in which that understanding has developed, the philosophy has moved on, but the theology for most of it is still stuck in that 3rd or 4th century way of thinking. So philosophically what has happened is there's been a move from what was called spirit metaphysics. This is this idea that there's a spirit substance that derives from the heaven realm. It's moved from that to a relational metaphysics. And what that means is today, when we look at the bottle of wine, we don't really think that it derives its essence from a heavenly realm. We actually realize that there was a farmer who went and looked at the piece of land, and he said, well, this is just at the right angle. It's the right kind of soil. It's the right kind of ecology. I'm going to plant this kind of vine here. And it's the relationship between that particular vine and that particular soil. It's the relationship between the bacteria within the soil and the plant. It's the relationship between the soil and the weather and the rain. It's the relationship between the farmer and the vine who in one day will decide, today we're going to harvest this crop. And that event happens where he harvests it all. And then it's the process by which that farmer produces the wine. It's this multitude of events and relationships that becomes condensed within this wine. And if you take any of those relationships away, or any of those events away, this wine will no longer be the wine that it is. Maybe spirit is just a condensing of all the relationships and all the events that have come together to make you, you. But what gives you substance are the relationships that have formed you. And that it is not connected to just an imaginary spiritual world, but that spirit is maybe much more present than what we've ever imagined. Now, why is that important? The difference between you and that bottle of wine, there's a lot of relationships, a lot of events that formed that bottle of wine. There's a lot of relationships, a lot of events that formed you. But the difference is the bottle of wine does not ask why. The bottle of wine doesn't say, what does this event mean? The bottle of wine only has an external story of the events that happened and formed it. But human beings has an insatiable desire for meaning. We're not satisfied with the fact that things happen. We want to know, what do they mean? And that inner story, that inner logic of your story is hugely significant in producing you, because you're not just the product of what happened to you, you are the product of your interpretation of those events. Because two people can be present at the same event. For the one, it is amazing. For the other, it is horrific. It's the same event. It's a different interpretation.
Wow.
So events do not come preloaded with meaning. Meaning is something created by consciousness. We're speaking about unleashing the Creator today, and part of the way in which the Creator wants to be released and unleashed is by giving you the gift of consciousness. Because consciousness creates meaning. And so that capacity to interpret the meaning of events, I want to go into a little bit of how it works, but maybe the first thing I want to do is to give an illustration of how an event that might seem absolutely devastating in the moment can be reinterpreted and become life-giving. And so I'm going to ask Mary Ann, are you okay? To do that. To tell us from when you were 11. So,
Chewing my sweet. So my mom passed away when I was 11, and as you can imagine, for a young child to lose a mom is a devastating event, and one which is inexplicable. You can't explain it, you can't at first really grasp or understand, but I kind of sensed from that moment that life was going to be very different. And as is when there is a loss, all other relationships have to be reinterpreted. Relationships that are no longer with that person there. And I went through the next year, I can almost describe as a kind of a haze, where things happened and I just responded, and it was in a haze. And there was a particular event where I was alone one day on a camp. I was now at the age of 12, and I was sitting and observing a sunset, and I knew it was the most magnificent sunset. Everything in logic told me it was there. But something in my experience would not let it in. And I felt in that moment gripped by grief, and it felt like I was being throttled. It was taking the breath out of me, and like a physical thing. And in that moment, I heard my mom's voice, and it was very clear. It was as if she was sitting next to me. And she said, she used to call me Melan. She said, Melan, and I knew, yes. And she said, I am so happy where I am. I want you to know that I am happy. And she said, now I want you to listen to me very carefully. I want you to live your life to the full, and never, ever let my death be an excuse for you not to live. And in that moment of grief, it suddenly everything just lifted. And I knew that I had permission to live, that I didn't need to let this moment define me for the rest of my life, but that I had permission to live to the full. And I only understood that moment. It took years, really, to grasp what had happened to me then. I didn't share it with anyone because I thought they'd think I was crazy. But I knew that I didn't know God at that time, but thank God He knows us, even when we don't know Him.
That's right.
And that He had, in His mercy, allowed me to hear this message of affirmation. And so for a moment there, I can look back at that moment with absolute gratitude, because I am the person I am today because of it. And that doesn't make sense to us at the time. But I realized that I could live with the knowledge that in a very real sense, she continued to live through me.
Mm-hmm.
And so a moment that could have just been completely meaningless, senseless, is filled with gratitude for everything that it has given me and it has for me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
you. Beautiful. So just the illustration to show that events that might not make any sense, that doesn't seem to have any value in the moment. And I'm not suggesting in any way that God determined or planned for that event to be what it is, but God gives us the creative capacity to reinterpret events for them to become life-giving rather than destructive. And although they were wrong, evil, or whatever in the moment, there is still an opportunity, a possibility for the meaning to be transformed and become life-giving. So this capacity for, and this responsibility that God says, you create the meaning. Is that a bit scary, or is it exciting?
Yes.
What extravagant freedom! What an extravagant gift! What love for God to say, I don't want to be in control of your narrative. I just want to, in every moment, invite you to see the beauty and the possibility for new life, new love, new laughter, despite what has happened. And so God's goodness isn't measured by His ability to prevent bad things from happening. If that is how we measure His goodness, then we seriously need to doubt His goodness. But God is not the one controlling and deciding on every event. He's more the one that stands in front of us. And whatever happens opens up possibilities for new beauty, new meaning, new life, new opportunities to laugh, despite what happened. See, Jesus comes and introduces us to resurrection life, and resurrection life is not the kind of life that avoids death. It's the kind of life that says, despite the worst that can be done, it is not the end of the story. We were speaking with friends this morning and remembering a time even in our own lives where it felt like we went through a type of hell, a type of death. And what a joy to discover a God who is with us there in our greatest alienation, in our greatest doubt. And now we can look back at those memories and all we feel towards it is gratitude. So I want to introduce one last thought about this ability to create meaning, because if we are given the responsibility to create meaning, it would be nice to kind of understand how we go about doing it, wouldn't it? And how to create better rather than worse meaning, because as we said, people can be present at the same event and experience it very differently. I remember we were invited to a beautiful piano recital years ago, and we made our way to this beautiful mansion on the kind of the edge of a nature reserve that's next to the sea, just a beautiful place. And we arrived there, and as we walked into the house, these big glass doors opened up onto a patio, and it just kind of drew me through. And outside the waves were crashing, and there was a piano standing in the corner, and soon the pianist came, and we all sat down, and the new sound filled the air, and it was as if the music was unfolding what was present everywhere. Even the waves seemed to rhythmically play along with this music, and the sun was setting, and it felt like the colors and everything became audible. It all just contributed to this crescendo of meaning. And in that experience, I realized that what gives every note its significance and its beauty is all the notes that came before. Any note just on its own does not have the beauty without the context of the melody. The present sound is both a conclusion of all that happened, and somehow the whole melody still resonates within this sound. But it's not just the conclusion of what came before, it is also the anticipation and the beauty and the possibility of what is yet to come. Wow. It is both a conclusion and the inception, an ending and the beginning. It has a history, but it is also pregnant with what is about to be birthed. And I realized that our life events are like that musical note. You are in fact this summary of a melody that has been playing for ages. So we heard a little bit about Bill's ancestors, of how many years they've been. Now, if you look at any one of your lives, there's these multitudes of relationships, and if you actually could see all the melodies that have come together to produce you, it is just miraculous. But you are not just the summary of all that came before. You are also a moment of possibility to produce something that has never been before. To realize these possibilities that are in God that have not been realized yet. Isn't that the beautiful scripture where he says, He was, He is, and He is to God, is to come. Doesn't that make God very temporal? There's something in God that was, that is no more. And there's something about God that is not yet. He was, He is to come. That this God for whom all things are possible is realizing Himself in the actualization of the possibilities that's in Him. And part of those possibilities being realized is you, of Him unfolding who He is in your life, in your existence. And so as I sat there and appreciated this moment, I knew that, especially the way I am, I can very easily just go off into my head, into thinking, and I could so easily have missed that moment. Have you ever been with somebody who wasn't there? I've often been with myself and I wasn't there. They're busy with yesterday, or they're busy with tomorrow, or they're busy somewhere beyond time, but they're not there. So there's a way of being conscious that can enrich your experience of reality, or there's a way of being conscious that blinds you to the beauty of what's present. You participate in creating your reality. You participate in creating your experience of your reality. And what this beautiful melody, what the gospel does, is not so much an invitation to escape this reality, as it is an invitation for your eyes to be opened to the potential and the beauty of what is present right here, right now. In one occasion, Jesus, there's few occasions that He was kind of mad at people, but in this one occasion he was quite mad at some of the guys who said they were kind of going on about future events, and He said, "You hypocrites, you know how to judge the weather and say, okay, tomorrow it's going to be good weather because the clouds are like this, or it's going to be bad weather. but you do not know how to recognize this present moment. Jesus wasn't so concerned about them getting their eschatology right as he was concerned about them missing this present moment. It is the beauty that's here. It is the, in another occasion he says, the kingdom of God is coming, but now is. So instead of the way we say it theologically is the kingdom of God is here but not yet, he kind of seemed to just take a hold of the future and bring it into the present.
Yes.
There's something coming, but it's here. It is right here, right now. And so this moment presents an opportunity to create something really, really unique. We spoke about Newtonian physics and a little bit of quantum physics, but Newtonian physics is basically just the logic of cause and effect. And if we have to put that into an understanding of how we interpret our life events, that's the kind of understanding that whatever happened to me in the past has set me on railroad tracks that is propelling me into the future. And I have very little choice. Now it's true that the story that has happened to you up to this moment, if I look back, that is the story that brought me here. But the gospel opens up a space between the past and the future and introduces us to I am, the God of possibility. And it severs this link in between cause and effect to create an opportunity for possibilities that does not arise from the past. And this is kind of what we now discover in quantum physics, that quantum physics tells us that the very nature of reality is not certainty, it's not cause and effect, but it's possibility. That even if we know all of the causes and all of the effects that we can exert onto electron, Heisenberg tells us we don't know exactly what effect it will have on this electron, because at the very lowest level of reality there's always more than one possibility. So the quantum physics opened up this idea that the future is truly undetermined, that there's possibilities beyond cause and effect, between the cause and the effect there's a moment of possibility. And it is that possibility that God invites us to say, you can decide what this event means. Now, unfortunately, most of us find security in being able to interpret the cause and predict the event so accurately that whatever happens to us, we want to make it fit into our story and to our way of interpreting things. And if it doesn't fit, we just ignore it. Or we suppress it because we don't like dealing with stuff that doesn't fit into the story. It's part of our brain operates like that. It wants certainty. But then there's a part of you, I like to call it the unconscious, which we were much more familiar with as children than what we are as adults. And that's the part that is not so certain about what things mean. It kind of has lots of options. And we don't have to try and remember when we were pre-conscious babies. You can just think of some of your dreams. Dreams are a little bit more chaotic. That you've got symbols and signifiers coming and in weird and wonderful places, and we often try and interpret our dreams from the perspective of the conscious mind, which is why they're so confusing. But if you understand that the unconscious don't attach the same meaning to the signifiers, it kind of proposes a meaning. If you think, oh, that's rubbish, okay, it proposes another meaning. It's kind of not sure what it means. Does this look good, or does this look good? And within the unconscious, there's also not the same sequence of time. There's a flow and a union that is very different from the conscious mind. It is a part of us that's a bit more chaotic, a part that's a bit more unstructured. It's kind of like Genesis 1 verse 2. This earth, it was void, chaotic, and it was a great depth of unformed chaos. But God comes and hovers over this chaos, over these unformed meanings. And the chaos is not God's enemy. It is actually the raw material from which He creates new meaning. And so, wonder how far I can take this. How quickly. I'm just going to suggest this, but you can go get it in the Creative Chaos book if you want the depth to it. I'm just going to kind of give you an insight into it. The unconscious part of us, throughout many myths and stories throughout human history, it has always been symbolized with some form of a circle. Because a circle has no top or bottom, no, the left and right looks the same. It's a whole that encircles everything. This symbol developed into the circular snake or into the enclosed garden. Kind of the same symbolism that we find in Genesis. An enclosure, something in which all things are whole, complete and one. And we can understand it even as children, you know, before the age at which they develop self-consciousness. When there's no self that you are conscious of, there's no separation between self and others. Everything is one. That's why if a baby's in a room and another baby starts crying, it will just start crying as well, or laughing, because it's all part of it. There's no separation between the self and the other. There's a wholeness, a oneness. Now that symbolism of union, there's something really beautiful and true about it. It's not just the product of a naive, undeveloped mind. I think it's a true participation in reality. There's a level in which all things are one. I think Colossians tells us that in Christ all things consists. But then our conscious mind develops, and that's quite a traumatic experience, because this is suddenly a part of me that says, I am separate from all else. I am not everything else. The very thing that makes me me is the fact that I'm not you. There's a separation. And this separation is traumatic, and it produces a sense of loneliness. It's one of Adam's first experiences, is God noticed that he was alone. And that experience of being alone is not good. I'm not going to go through the whole of Genesis, but what I wanted to introduce is that the story of Rebecca is so beautiful in exploring this conscious and unconscious part of who you are. And to put it in context, the reason I want to quickly speak about it is those two levels, two aspects of who you are is essential in creating meaning. Because many of us get stuck in just creating meaning in the conscious part, in the logical part, and we miss out on a lot of the creativity and the wisdom of the unconscious. So that's why I'm dealing with this, to put it in context. So Rebecca, at one stage she's barren. I think that's a beautiful metaphor for when we become so certain about how our world works, about who we are, about who God is, our stories become sterile. Our stories become boringly predictable. They produce nothing new. We get stuck in our certainty. This is my story. This is my doctrine. This is my God. I'm absolutely certain and absolutely boring. That's what that kind of certainty produces. And so Rebecca is barren, and Isaac prays for her, and she conceives, and she discovers that there's another within herself. I think her pregnancy is this beautiful metaphor of discovering the other within the self. There's a part of you you know, and there's a part of you you don't. And discovering the other within the self is the most disturbing and most wonderful experience at the same time. It's disturbing because suddenly there's another voice that questions your certainty. And this experience for Rebecca is disturbing. And she's the first biblical character that asks the existential question, why I? What am I? And it drives her to inquire of the Lord. And God does not kind of just comfort her and say, let's get rid of your confusing feeling of otherness. God actually confirms her disunity. We like being centered. We like being sure. We like being in control of our story, but in doing that we miss out on a lot of creative, imaginative potential. And so God actually confirms her disunity, and he says, yes, there's two nations at war within you. Thanks. And so I want to take the metaphor a little bit further. These are all metaphors, do you understand? When we speak about God, we always speak it in metaphors.
That's right.
We always point to something that's beyond language. We always point to a reality that's larger than our concepts. So I want to take the metaphor further and think of Esau and Jacob as metaphors for the unconscious and the conscious. Every child is born without self-consciousness. We call it the pre-conscious state. So the unconscious is birthed first, the way in which Esau is born first. And Esau's very nature gives us a clue as to the nature of the unconscious. He's wild, and he's hairy. He's like a creature, and as he grows up, he's much more at home with the animals in the wild. He doesn't want a tent. He doesn't want. And he becomes a hunter. Hunting is very much the art of being very present in this moment. Because if you, depending on what you hunt, it means either death for you or for what you hunt. You've got to be present. You've got to hear. You've got to smell. You've got to notice the wind. You've got to see the movement of the. You've got to be present. And we see Esau. He's not that obsessed with birthright and stuff that's going to come in the future. He's hungry now. He's present in this moment. But Jacob is holding on to his leg. He follows not far behind. And And every child being born into this unconscious union, very soon discovers that there's something else brewing. The self-consciousness is present in the embryonic form, and Jacob is the one who's more refined and who wants to be in control. He's the guy that builds his own tent, a space where he created this space. He's in control of this space. And he's much more calculated and conscious of the future. You need both of those. But their story is very much the story of every human development. That there comes a time where the conscious part of you suppresses the unconscious, wants to take away its birthright, wants to deny its identity. And in that conflict between the conscious and the unconscious, it comes to a head when Jacob deceives Isaac and he takes the birthright and he becomes fearful of Esau and he flees. I'm not going to go through the whole story, but there's where we want to end up is that Esau and Jacob reconciles, that there's a place in which the conscious mind and the unconscious mind can be reconciled again, where the imaginative, the creative and the logical, predictive can come together in a union that produces meaning that is much richer than if you have them out of balance. So Jacob comes to a place called Bethel. Now the Bible doesn't use the words conscious and unconscious. Those are modern psychological terms. The Bible speaks a lot about dreams. And that is the ancient way of speaking about the part of you that you're not consciously in control of. That's the Bible's way of speaking about your unconscious. And so the scriptures are full of dreams, and God often encounters people in this unconscious, uncontrolled environment. Where he says, would you just take a break from yourself so that you can encounter me? Would you just take a break from all your logic, all your everything you know about me, and when you unconscious, then maybe we can have a conversation. And so Jacob falls asleep, and angels, messengers of God ascends and descends, and all the fragmented parts of his life seem to be connected. What was formless, what was disconnected, the earthly from the transcendent is again connecting. And he wakes up, and our translation says it this way: God is in this place and I did not know it. The Zohar, which is an ancient Jewish commentary and translation of this verse, says it this way: God is in this I did not know. See, very often we try and suppress and ignore the unconscious because we don't know what's lurking there. But God is in this I do not know. There's a part of you that's not subject to your logical control. And we do not have to fear that part. Many psychologists will tell us that the conscious and the unconscious are like two different systems. They record the same events, but they do it in different languages. And so it needs a different type of interpretation. And your conscious story is always written over the text of the unconscious story. And that complexity actually gives opportunity for richer meaning. If we become conscious of the fact that within our language, within our desire to accurately define things, we should always be open to meaning that is beyond our definitions and our descriptions. Then there comes a richer opportunity for meaning. And so, I want to conclude of all that we said yesterday and today. We began by looking at the fact that God gives this extravagant freedom for us to author our own stories. And we compared the two metaphors of story and plan. And both of them have got their place, but we've often pushed the plan metaphor to the extent that there's no space for story. And we kind of brought that to a place to say there's space for plans within the story. But there's an incredible freedom that God gives us to author our own stories. Last night we started looking at what does this mean concerning the nature of God. A God that is absolutely at home in our stories. Absolutely humble within these stories in terms of not imposing meaning but creating opportunities for us to choose what things mean. And this morning I wanted to just kind of delve a little bit deeper to say just this simple suggestion that there's a part of you you don't know. And God is in this I do not know. That there's a part of you that is more, that has more depth. In fact, if you start delving into this part of you, and this is what we do in our meditation retreats, is we kind of just create a space for God to, we consent for God to do things within the unconscious, and you discover a depth to your unconscious, and there's such a depth that at some point it becomes infinite, and it becomes difficult to tell the difference between your unconscious and God. There's a connection there, and you become intimately aware that maybe consciousness is simply God gifting himself to you. I can't remember who wrote this poem, but there's a beautiful poem where the guy speaks about the mountains, that these beautiful stable structures in which he becomes aware of. It seems like God is asleep, resting in the mountains, and then he becomes aware of the plants and the animals, and he says it seems like God is waking up. And when he looks at humanity, and he says, in humanity, God becomes aware of himself.
Wow.
That God becomes fully awake. So what a gift of consciousness we've been given. What an invitation to participate in creating the meaning of our lives. I remember once I was praying about a very big decision. And you know, there's times that I would pray and I would have such an easy answer, yes or no. I would just have peace this way, not peace this way. But this time I struggled because I wanted to do something that I was kind of half certain this doesn't seem like it would be God's will. But I can't continue in this direction. And I sought God's counsel and prayed for it for days. And eventually, because there was only silence, I was just so frustrated. I said, God, I don't care whether this is your will or not. This is what I'm doing. And I've never spoken to God like that. I kind of shocked myself, but I was in such a desperate situation that I just said, I can't do that even if it is your will. And so I made that decision, and the moment I made that decision, I just felt the Lord's presence embracing me And I was offended. I said, where the hell were you a minute ago when I needed you to answer me? Now you show up. Now that I've gone through this agony of having to make a decision, and I so experienced God saying, I wanted you to grow up and make this decision. I trust you. And I started realizing that very often when there's only silence, it's not because God has abandoned you. It's God's way of saying, I trust you.
Wow.
I trust you to decide what needs to be decided. And I will be right there with you, opening up new opportunities. I'm going to ask Mary Ann to just do another song or two. Thank you, Papa, for this beautiful gospel. Thank you, Jesus, for introducing us to the God of possibilities. A God that so trusts us to create the meaning of our lives, to create a new world. A world that acknowledges the beauty of God in all that is created. We honor you, Abba. Honor you. Amen.
Take it in, close your eyes, feel the warmth of my smile. I'm the one who knows you from within. I see through your eyes. Take it in, now open your eyes. See the world through my smile. I'm the one who knows them from within. I see through their eyes and I say, enjoy this moment, it is ours. Breathe in the beauty of my life. For I am ready to live, I'm ready to laugh, I am ready to love through your life. I'm so ready to see, ready to heal, I am ready to be through you. Such infinite possibilities, infinite opportunities. We take it in, we open our eyes, we feel the warmth of your smile. You're the one who knows us from within. You see through our eyes and you say, enjoy this moment, it is ours. and I'm hovering over your life in the midst of all that strife. I'm ready to make all things new, for I love being in you. So take it in.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna throw a curveball just because I just felt to. We were gonna invite a couple people up, and we may still do that in a second. I don't know, but I had a couple things that I just had to share, and then I feel like we'll do something else. Maybe, I don't know, but just something that Andre said that I just felt led to highlight. He focused on two metaphors, and it just something rocked me. One was the Genesis story, right? And this emergent humanity in this primordial garden, a man who realized he was alone, and God gave him a partner, and they still couldn't quite figure it out, and they ate from this tree of knowledge of good and evil, this logic, conscious tree, and mortality became aware in their consciousness, and they tied mortality around morality, and it says that God removed them from the garden, right? That's the story we all know. And then the Jacob story. Jacob leaves because he fears this chaotic wild brother, Harry, and he flees and he goes around. In both instances, prior to the reconciliation, or whatever we want to call it. In the garden story, we don't see the reconciliation take place in the way we would like it to be seen. In the story of Jacob and Esau, we do. We see a reconciliation that takes place, but there's an encounter before that. There's a wrestling match with God himself, right? There's a battle. There's a war that's raged. It's not a peace. It's a violent experience, to use a word. In the garden story, it's something I've shared with our little home group, our home community, that God showed me this. Can you remember what is placed in the garden between Adam and Eve?
Cherub with a sword.
There's a cherub with a flaming sword striking back and forth. Has anybody ever thought that's just the weirdest part of the Bible? I mean, think about it. God's like, hey, cast you, we're going to put you out here outside of this garden place, and I'm going to throw what's a cherub? If you know the answer, don't say it. Make it, what's a cherub? What? Does anybody?
Angel baby.
An angel baby, that's good. A baby. It's a baby. That's what a baby, it's a baby.
Chubby.
A chubby baby. That's what a cherub is. It's a chubby baby. How many people have seen chubby babies with flaming swords? It's weird. There's a chubby baby with a lightsaber in between Adam and Eve and the garden. We're both trees, right? We have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. The incarnation is a chubby baby with a flaming sword of truth that penetrates, splitting us. And Adam and Eve, what God was saying is, you can't get back into this garden until you have a violent encounter with a chubby baby with a lightsaber. The same encounter Jacob had, right? Before he could reconcile the chaotic with the logic. And at that encounter of the incarnation, we begin to reconcile who we are in this thing that is I am. This thing that is Christ, whatever we want to label it in our own vernacular. There is not a man, woman, child, dog, tree, tree that is outside of this meaning, this place of meaning. So I want to invite Charles and Dave and Mary Ann back up and take a couple questions. But I just felt like I just wanted to communicate. That's what God was showing me, that you were so dead on, and yet there's this encounter with the Lamb slain before the foundation of the world. The humble, look, there's the lion. And I turned and I saw the Lamb.
Yeah, beautiful.
Right?